So we're going to go ahead and cut over to a video of a lap that I did. It was my last lap of the day, and I did with Doug. I don't think it was my fastest, but we're going to use this one because we were both in the vehicle for it. We're going to go ahead and run through it and just let it play through, and then we'll come back. We won't be talking as in-depth about this, but we're just going to be able to bring up the differences we were talking about with driving a rear-wheel vehicle with a good set of tires versus a front-wheel drive vehicle without good tires.
You're looking at mid-horsepower, rear-wheel drive, limited slip, suspension mods, and pretty decent street tires on my car versus John's car being front-wheel drive, relatively low horsepower, street, regular street tires. A lot more slip angles. See that? I mean, even right there you saw it. He's pushing further out in turns and therefore not able to get on the gas as soon. That was good there.
That's where I was talking about, where I bumped it out.
See, there you got it kind of wide.
Yep.
But again, front-wheel drive, you're using your front wheel to do everything. So you're a lot more likely to get a push going. Yeah, you're driving a lot further than me.
Yep. And that's just because I got to take up that real estate to try and keep my momentum, basically. Yep. That's the difference between having a low-power vehicle. That's where I biffed it.
Yeah, I remember telling you that at the time. It's like, oh.
Other than that last turn, I don't think you can get
yeah, you can say it in the video. So we'll go back and we'll kind of break it down a little bit. But you can already really kind of see the differences as to what we're talking about between how you drive the vehicles. Part of that, I guess a good quick anecdote for that to show the differences, my cousin, he used to race 125cc street bikes on a track, and he did the national tour, similar to how they have nationals for that CCA, but for motorcycles. And I asked him, 125, that's not much, and it was two-stroke. I asked him, hey, what's the difference between running that and running, maybe a 600cc or even something smaller? How do you have to ride it? He's like, well, you don't have power. And when you don't have power, you don't want to brake, because if you brake, then you lose your speed. So it's a totally different kind of driving, because you want to go into those turns
can't get it back,
carrying your speed. So he's like, and this guy has ridden all kinds of bikes, so he's like, riding those on the track is so much hairier because you just have to go into those turns hard. And that's something that he told me years ago, and so I guess I kind of carried that over into what I do here.
Well, yeah, there's a fine line to be walked there, though, because if you come in, we're going to see a couple of places there where I think you pushed unnecessarily.
Oh, yeah, and I agree. And I think
if you had started braking
with that
sooner,
last lap, I think having that extra person in there with me kind of threw me off a little bit.
Out.
Yeah, and so I just wasn't keeping it as tight.
Since we've got so many people who are learning who are front-wheel drive, we're going to want to take a look at that. And I think that this is something I was talking to Ro about, too. There are places where, with front-wheel drive, if you give it up ahead of time, then you can get back on the gas sooner and you can pull yourself through the corners.
Absolutely.
If you brake too late and you end up trying to steer and brake at the same time, or steer and gas at the same time, then you get into those I kind of think of them as terminal push situations where you just cannot get back to the good line.
You'll be able, I did it more on this one.
That's good news.
Yeah, so you'll be able to see this wasn't one of my best laps, but we were both in the car, so we're just going to use this one.
Right.
My other ones will be on YouTube that you can go and look and see the faster ones. And when I get the results again, I'll go back and mark which one was the fastest and which was the lowest. But I'm going to go ahead and turn up the volume on the video
so we can hear
a bit more, so you can hear when I'm hammering, when I'm getting on that throttle, and at the same time that I don't have traction or when I'm losing it.
Well, and we also need to keep in mind I haven't driven your car, so it may be that you're driving it better than I think I could.
Right. Yeah, it's an odd setup. I'll say that. And the thing you have to keep in mind is that I'm running standard tires on there.
500 tread wear.
No, it's
420.
Those are 420. But even regardless, that's not what you really want to be on. But it's what I'm on every day, so I know those tires.
Sure.
So we'll go ahead and get it going.
there, right there already. You can tell it's front-wheel drive car because you're turning wider than me. But you can also, I don't know if you can see it from the video or not, but I knew because I was in the car. You could feel it pulling through the turns, front-wheel drive style.
Yeah, and really the reason for that is that I'm taking up that bigger line because I want more speed. And I don't have a lot of power, so I have to use more space to get that speed that I want to carry through these turns, because I'm not going to brake as hard going into these shorter, they're not really deep turns, so I know I can go into them harder. So that's why, I kind of go a bit wider. And coming out right before I went into that last turn is when I had my shift point. Brake a bit there, but really just carry it through. Some bit of braking there, but almost as soon as I'm braking, I'm right back on the throttle. And that braking is probably just to reduce my speed enough to where my tires stay gripping. Because if I go into that too deep and I crank the wheel too much, I'm going to lose that traction, and I'm just going to keep going straight instead of actually turning.
The test and tune, I keep telling everybody this, and I hope it actually pans out. The test and tune is going to be really interesting because I want to try, watching that turn, I want to try driving your car and taking a really high outside approach to a turn like that.
Right.
And then turning early, braking early, turning early, and getting back on the gas. You went deep through the bottom of that turn and pushed out and gassed back in. I want to see if a completely opposite approach generates a faster turn.
And
so
it may be possible.
Get up high, get the braking done, get the turning done, and then gas clear through the turn. Well, when you've already reestablished traction. I can't say whether it would be faster without trying it.
Right.
It depends a lot on the car. That was really smooth through there. It was really smooth and tight both.
Yeah, and that's the thing that we were talking about, how people slow down for stuff. I mean,
yeah,
I have a skinnier car than some of the other cars that you see out there, so I'm able to get away with some things. It's not as extreme as like you would see with a car,
right,
where
but it makes a difference.
But you can see how on that
certainly
one,
narrower than a Camaro.
Yeah, exactly. And so I can squeeze through, especially whenever box turns come up. I don't really ever, unless they're really extreme,
take a lot of input.
I never really consider them to be really turns. Yeah. It's just something I have to kind of nudge
just
through.
Wiggle a little.
And I think what really helps with that is I have a really high awareness of where my vehicle is.
Yeah, because it's your daily driver.
I get really close to those cones. I get as close, and I don't really ever hit them, but I definitely don't stay far away from them.
That was something I didn't realize for a long time because I had never autocrossed my daily driver, is how long it takes you. And I really noticed this with the Formula car because it didn't have fenders and those wheels are sticking way out there. It takes you a long time to figure out where the corners are, unless it's your daily driver.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I mean, the corners of the car.
And the other thing is that you can just hear me accelerating all the way through, which is what we were saying before.
Yep.
And I have my foot down the whole way. A bit of braking coming to that, but you can see how...
So that was good, though. I mean, you didn't break traction there. You braked hard, you squealed a little bit.
Right.
And then you were able to steer and gas at the same time.
Yeah, and I think if we put the two videos that we had up next to each other, you were probably further in to the right than I was.
But I got a lot more traction.
Exactly. I was using what I had. And then you could see that I went around the cone and came back to the left.
Yeah, you had a very different line through this turn.
Right. And you can see how, I put the mouse right up in here. You can see how other people were doing something similar. You can see where the chalk's been worn out. Yeah,
this was the actual last run of the day.
Yeah.
Now see here, again, I don't know your car, but I don't pretend to know your car better than you do. But my inclination there would be to brake sooner and harder, and then use the power to power through the turn earlier, because you ended up a lot further outside in that turn than I did.
Yeah,
but I don't know that was the wrong line.
This was a bit slower lap, so I can't say that that's how I necessarily intended to do it. We can go back a little bit just to kind of look at it again.
There's 4 lines. There's the good line, the bad line, the line you want, and the line your car takes.
Okay, so I think the reason that you see that, and we'll back it up a little bit further so you can see what I'm talking about, is you swing wide, okay, but as my concern is always this cone right here.
Right.
And so the path that you take after you swing wide to keep that momentum, I go wide again.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what.
That's something I want to talk through and walk through and ride through with some of the guys at the test and tune. Though,
right.
For that, you kept plenty of momentum, but I think your momentum was going in a less than optimal direction.
Right.
Your momentum was going off course in that case.
Yeah, that's usually what I'm shooting for. As to the actual execution, it doesn't always pan out.
I think that time the momentum carried you to the outside of the turn.
Right.
If you turn, you got to drive it to know though. I don't know.
Right.
Like you said, you have this idea. We were talking about this yesterday. I think you said you rode in Josh and Jeff's car.
Yeah. And his and for those of you that don't know his name, he's an SMF.
I think so. I can't keep track of the classes anymore.
And he has the red Honda Civic.
Red Civic hatch.
Yeah, and it's one of the older ones.
Yep.
And he's done a lot of work to that car.
It's sticky.
Oh yeah.
And so what John was saying when we were talking about it is that Jeff's car had a lot more of a tendency to go A, where Jeff pointed it, and B, where John thought his car should have been going. So
yeah, absolutely. And that's what.
And that's a front wheel drive car too. It's a comparable car in some ways.
Yeah, as far as ability to do a certain line, he has way more power than I do. But the basically it confirmed me that yes, with the proper tires, the lines that I think should be possible are definitely possible. And eventually I will get a new set of tires, and when I do, I'll be driving much differently.
What was the time differential between you guys yesterday?
Between
you and Jeff?
SGC?
Between you and Jeff.
Oh, I couldn't tell you. Jeff's another class.
Gotcha.
So I didn't think to look at it.
I was just curious.
Yeah, that's something I do need to.
That's something I like to do, is find a car that's in the same general category as mine.
Right.
At least like rear wheel drive. Roughly the same weight range. Now I'm lucky because I got Leon to compare to, and it's virtually identical car. But if you ballpark it and say, okay, well, Jeff's a pretty good example of how fast a well set up, powerful front wheel drive car can go on this course, then that gives me a rough benchmark.
That's something we'll have to go look at. Unfortunately, right now the event results aren't up, and I didn't think to take photos of the scoreboards.
I like to do that kind of thing as a reference point. If I don't have, because with Autocross you don't necessarily have a way to directly compare yourself to your previous performances. Mm-hmm. It's not the same track, but comparing yourself to other people who are in your ballpark, even if they're way faster than you, it's like, okay, well, last week on a 40-second course he was 4 seconds faster than me, and this week on a 45-second course he was only 2 seconds faster. I'm gaining on him. Right.
So coming out of that one, went kind of wide, and then we're getting set up in the other one. You can hear me kind of chirp the tires a bit.
Granted, I thought you went too wide in the early part of that turn, but the late part of that turn, in terms of when you got the turn finished and got on the gas, I think that was great. That was clearly that's an example of you knowing how to drive your car.
And I'm going to back it off a little bit, and we'll remain silent. But this is something that, with these lower powered front wheel drive cars, something that comes up a lot of times.
Do you shift or not?
Do you downshift out of second and a first? And on this corner I definitely do, but I want you to be able to hear that shift point. And I was talking about it earlier when we were watching Doug's lap about what it was, where I did it, so you can just have an idea of it. So back it off a bit, and we'll listen to, you'll be able to hear the engine drop down in RPMs. So, as you heard and you kind of saw the car drop a bit, coming out of that, going into that turn, halfway through the turn, I dropped gears, and coming out of it, I let the clutch out and was accelerating out of that turn in first. And maybe 10 feet?
Yeah.
That first gate,
not much.
I was already just about to shift.
Yeah.
But I did a lap where I stayed in second, and it was just that right spot where it needed to be done.
And that's tough because you gotta think your way through that ahead of time. You don't have time to test.
Yeah, that's something you have to really
you just have to know.
And even just running that lap, that's one of those things that you have to prepare for, because shifts can take up a good chunk of time.
Well, and I was thinking about that last night. That's one of the hard parts about autocross. Is you have to be able to walk and look at the course and know that stuff. Mm-hmm. If you go down to New Orleans and run the road course down there, you go through turn 13 4 or 5 times. It's like, okay, I went through it in second and I was revving out. I'm going to go through it in third. Or I went through it in third, I go through turn 4 in third, and I bogged down coming into 5, I'm going to downshift. And you get to practice that 17 or 18 times in a session.
Right.
Here you got to go out there and do it right, ideally the first time.
Yep.
And you have to be able to look at the element and know, and that's tough. That takes a lot of time and a lot of experience.
Oh yeah, and I know Josh was saying in his Civic, his transmission just doesn't.
Yeah,
it doesn't like doing that, so he can't do that.
Well, downshifts into first are tough.
They are.
It's some cars, especially older cars or slightly worn transmissions, your synchros might be a little weak. It's hard to get back into first if you're moving at all.
Right. Yeah, and mine's kind of like that. It's finicky about it. You have to know that sweet spot. And really, I could tell you, if I tried doing this last year, if I tried doing this at the beginning of the season, I wouldn't have been able to pull it off. And the reason for that is, I think 2 events ago, in between the previous event and that event, I had put in a short shifter kit, and it just
firmed things up, shortened things up. That was a big deal.
It nearly halved the throw distance.
Well, and it replaced some of the worn bushings too.
No, all it did was.
Okay, I thought it was
no,
new
it just kind of it's a little plate that you put on top of it.
Cool.
And everything.
So it just changed the pivot points.
Yeah, exactly. And so it just, if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have been able to do that.
That's interesting.
But if you saw me the event after I did it, you would have heard me grinding gears because I only did it a week before and I wasn't used to it. So, there are, one event it wasn't good for me. This event it was good for me. So those are things you have to consider.
It's the nature of autocross. The pressure's on right away.
Oh yeah. We'll let it go a little bit further. On this one, I probably swung wider than you did on that one. But that kind of goes in hand with the idea that I have to carry momentum, and I just don't have sticky tires.
Yep.
I have to kind of let them pull it through. And that one I cut pretty sharp.
Yeah, you got kind of deep in that one.
Right.
Now that turn I really liked. I remember when I was riding with you, I was thinking about it. I was like, okay, the one before that, I think you broke kind of late and used up your traction so that when you were trying to turn, you were already into a high slip angle.
Right.
And that was why you got out so far on that cone that we just passed. But then in this one, you were slowed down enough so that once you turned, you got unwound and you got on the gas, and it just went a perfect line right through that whole turn. Mm-hmm. This is the one we just came through here. And it'll set you up well for this section too. This is a good section. This is great.
And that one
you're really good in those transitionals. I mean, you're on and off the gas in good spots, and you're keeping a nice straight line.
Well,
that's a strong point.
And I think the thing is that it goes right back to that traction thing. If I have the traction, I know where to put it. But once I start losing that traction, it gets a little squirrely.
Well, that's to me, that's one of the really tricky things about front wheel drive. And honestly, that's one of the reasons my car is so easy to drive, is because it has quite a bit of horsepower and quite a bit of traction. And if I do go wrong, I'm usually going to go wrong into an oversteer situation.
Right.
If you go wrong into an understeer situation.
Mm-hmm.
And understeer is death on times. I mean, because if I go wrong, sometimes what happens is the car's at least traveling along the racing line. It's just not pointing in the right direction. Whereas for you end up pointing off the racing line when you lose traction, and that's a big deal. Mm-hmm. You kind of pushed out the backside of it right here.
Yeah, that one I just came in too hard.
Yep.
And you can hear it
it's like scrubbing. Yeah. Yeah, my car does that too.
Yeah, it was just I came in a little too hot for that corner and was trying to cut it over too much.
I'm going to be really interested to see when we get a chance to work more with you driving in your car, if braking much earlier and then driving the car, pulling the car through the turns with power works for you. And
I had tried to go, I guess, slower on one of my laps on this course, where I was trying to go into the turn slower.
A real tight line.
Yeah, and that was a slower lap.
No kidding.
So I don't know if I just wasn't doing it right.
Well, it's hard to say. You have to have a certain amount of slip angle to get around an autocross course, and a little bit of sliding helps. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting to drive each other's cars and try some different things and see.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Got the recovery out of that, and you can hear it coming through that finish line, like I was talking about earlier. How you want to carry that acceleration through.
Yep, that's something, like you said, it's just one more little thing to pick up a few tenths here and there, and if you listen to people on the course when you're working the course, listen to what people do, you'll hear some people back off before the finish, and you won't hear people who've been doing it for 25, 30 years going fast, backing off before the finish.
Yeah, absolutely.